Hello, and welcome to a Cloud Developer channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you a feature of Azure called Logic Apps. And what Logic Apps are a way to be able to quickly build powerful solutions, whether it be for your enterprise or just for yourself, to be able to integrate different applications together and build a new breed of applications that allow you to aggregate information from different sources and be able to trigger different events. You can also use these Logic apps for being able to start doing home automation and being able to pretty much automate anything you want as long as it's able to be accessed through an API of some sort. So Logic apps are actually a very powerful way of being able to build solutions that are hosted in the cloud as well. You don't actually have to set up a VM or anything like that. They're very robust. They're very scalable. And the only thing you really need to worry about is just how do you actually implement the actual process itself, the business logic, and not have to worry about the infrastructure layer. So what they do provide you in Azure are many different things. For example, you can actually integrate using their out-of-the-box connectors. So as an example, you can actually hook it up to your Twitter account. You can hook it up to GitHub. You can hook up to other applications that are already available in the Azure space for Logic apps. And they are constantly adding new connectors, and you can actually even go to user voice and request additional connectors to be built as well. So let me show you an example of how you would use Logic apps to do something interesting. And what I'll show you today is a way to be able to build a small, very simple application that all it does is basically keeps my statistics of the YouTube video count and subscriber count updated outside of the actual YouTube channel in another Azure Table storage that I have. And what I'll start with is I'm going to first go ahead and create a new Logic app. And I'll go ahead and click Add in my Azure portal. And I'll just search for Logic. And I'll choose Logic app here. And I'll go ahead and click Create. And then here, you want to actually give it a name that makes sense for your Logic app. So a Logic app truly is an application that you build to contain the business process that you want. So as an example, if your application, all it needs to do is just go to some website and just retrieve some information, that you want to actually call it something that's relevant to what that Logic app does. The apps themselves don't really allow you to create sub-functions within them. So it's not like you're building this massive application. You're basically building mini applications. So a good thing to do, good practice to have is actually to name them specifically for the purpose that they're built. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it clouddeveloper.io YouTube stats update. And I'm going to use an existing resource group. I'll put it in my Cloud Developer IO resource group. And I'll go ahead and put it into the East US location. And I'll go ahead and hit create here. So we'll give it a moment to actually create, and then we'll go ahead and start setting it up. So once, since it's doing that, actually completed, so it's a pretty quick process. What I want to show you is I'm going to be actually creating this Logic app using some Azure functions that I've created for this purpose. So in a prior video, I actually showed you how to create Azure functions and consume them as REST API endpoints. And we're going to be basically doing the same exact thing using Logic apps. So we're going to be actually invoking these Azure functions using our Logic app. And what I've done here is I've actually set up this get YouTube subscriber count. Actually, it does not only subscriber count, but in this case, I also get the video count as well. And the way I've set it up is I actually, the first thing I do is I go to the configuration manager, which is a way to be able to ask your Azure Function app to give you some configuration settings. And in this case, I'm actually getting the YouTube API URL as well as the YouTube key. And the reason I do this is because, for one, I don't want to actually hardcode the key and the URL inside of this function in case they need to change. The other thing is for security purposes, so that I don't actually have to show it to anybody as I'm showing the demo, what the keys are, so I don't have to keep changing it all the time. Just to show you where this information is actually stored, if I click on the clouddeveloper.io func and I go to the application settings, you'll see in this section here on the right, you'll be able to scroll down, and this is where I actually store the information. So it doesn't show you the full string, so it doesn't matter for the purposes of the video. So in here I have the YouTube key and I have the YouTube API URL. So let's go back to the actual Azure function, and I'll go back to it here. And so the first two things I'm doing is I'm getting those configuration values. Then I'm actually generating the full URL by basically concatenating the two strings together. I then actually make an HTTP client object, and this is actually used to make a REST API call, a GET call out to the YouTube API essentially. And on successful return, it will actually read the content as a string and populate this API data object. Then I initialize the video count and the subscriber count to -1 to indicate that I have some value in there in case the values don't come back correctly, and I'll be able to actually output that result and know that something is wrong when I'm doing troubleshooting. So, but in this case, if the value is not empty, I basically go in and use a Newtonsoft JSON library that's declared up at the top to be able to actually deserialize it into a dynamic object. And what this allows me to do is actually be able to then read that dynamic object and be able to actually pull the properties off of it. So in this particular case, I'm actually getting the statistics for my channel, and I'm getting the video count as well as the subscriber count, and I populate the variables right here. And then if the data was empty, I will actually return a bad request telling the consumer of the API that we were not able to retrieve the YouTube statistics. But if everything looked good, I'm actually going to go ahead and return a response of HTTP OK, which is a 200 status code. And then I'll actually return the video count and the subscriber count properties. So this will actually generate a response. And let's go ahead and actually run this and see what happens. So in this particular case, as soon as I ran it, you can actually see that it returned the video count as well as the subscriber count for my channel. So this is the basics of this get YouTube subscriber count function. The other function that I have is actually related to being able to update that information. So this is so that I can abstract the get call itself and be able to invoke it remotely. And I can start using this for many different things that I might want to do with my information statistics about my YouTube channel. And then the other one is I made it specifically for this demo so that I can show you how to actually consume the data that comes out of that function and be able to actually populate it in Azure Table storage. So in this particular case, I actually have an input variable of Cloud Table. And again, you can actually see how to set all of this up in my prior video. I explained the process of hooking everything up, and then also explain the process of how do you configure this function to be able to write to the table. But just as a quick explanation, basically I get a reference to that table. I actually read the body of the request that's coming in. I obtain the actual video count and subscriber count that comes in as a JSON payload. And then I'll log it to the log file just for troubleshooting purposes, so I have that information. I then actually read a table that is of type YouTube stats, and I execute that request. And then what I will get is actually two rows. One row is going to contain a property of type video count or name video count. The other one is going to be a subscriber count. So I'll actually load them as separate objects. I'll take the values that were passed in to me through the HTTP request. I'll update the values in individual rows, and then I'll execute the update on the actual Azure Table storage itself. and then return the actual HTTP status OK, telling the consumer that the request succeeded correctly, or completed successfully, I should say. So in this particular case, the function exits and we're good to go. So just to show you how this actually ends up working, let me bring up Azure Storage Explorer, and I'll show you the table and to show you that it actually works. So if I go to my storage account, I'll go to tables. I have a table called YouTube stats. And in this particular table, I have two records here, one with a row key of 1, the other one is row key 2. You can see the property is called video count, and then the other one is called subscriber count, and they have values set to -1 right now to indicate that basically I don't have any values populated yet. So let's go back to this function here, and here I'm going to be doing an HTTP post. And because this is what this function is set up to actually accept, an actual HTTP post. And then I'm going to be passing video count of 2 and subscriber count of 2. So let's go ahead and run it. And it's successful. So if I go into the Explorer, I should be able to see the updated values. So you can see that the values got updated right here. And then if I actually change them to something else, and go ahead and run this, you should be able to see the same values show up. And there you go. So as you can see, everything is actually working the way that I want to. So let me go ahead and reset the values real quick. And now is the time for us to actually go and see how can we leverage Azure Logical Apps to be able to consume these Azure functions. So, and there's a couple ways to do that. So the easiest way I'll show you is, let me actually bring up this application here first. And in here, there is actually a designer view that you can use. And as you can see, you can actually pick from many different templates that are already available to you. So you can send emails, you can trigger logic when a file is actually uploaded into Dropbox, and copy it to OneDrive. There's many different things you can actually do with these logic apps. But what I'm going to do is actually going to start with a blank logic app. And the first thing it asks you is, what do you want the trigger point to be? So in this particular case, there's actually many triggers. So in this case, there's 161 triggers. And there's also a bunch of different connectors that you can actually have. And these connectors serve as a way for you to be able to connect to different systems to trigger different operations. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and type in HTTP. And I'll pick the HTTP connector, and I'll choose this HTTP connector. And the parameters that I'm going to be choosing here is, first of all, the method type, which is going to be a GET, because what I want to be able to do is actually go ahead and issue a GET request to the Get YouTube Statistics function itself. So let me actually open up that real quick. So in here, what I'll do is I'll go to my resources, I'll go to my Azure Functions, and I'm going to go ahead and get the actual URL. So the URL for Get YouTube Subscriber Count, I can click this button here, click copy, and actually let me go back and I'll dock this in here, and I'll just paste the value here. So this is actually going to be the URL that's going to be invoked. I don't actually need to do anything else in here to actually make this call successful. The one thing that I do want to point out, though, is that by default, you have to have a trigger point for your logic app. So in this particular case, it defaults it to 3 minutes. So every 3 minutes is actually going to end up executing in this particular instance. So I don't actually need to execute it that often, but for the purposes of testing, what I can do is actually, I'll set it to something like 10 seconds. This way it executes as more frequently as I'm actually showing you and debugging the application. So in this particular case, this will actually execute that Azure function. And then what do I do with this? So the next step that I want to be able to do is I want to take the output of this and trigger the next step of being able to actually update my account. Now, again, there's actually a few different ways to do this. One way is I can click on this new step and actually add an action, which is an HTTP action. But there's also this Azure Function. So in fact, if you have Azure Functions already part of your subscription, you can simply click on Azure Functions, click on the Azure Function app that you have, and you can see all of the different functions load right here. And you should be able to actually click on this Update YouTube Statistics, and then provide the actual body that you want to specify. That's one way to actually perform this operation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stay outside of my Azure account itself. So basically, I would act as I didn't have this Azure function inside of my actual subscription, just to show you how you can actually integrate different disconnected applications. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add an action, and that's going to be an HTTP action. Again, similar to what I did up above. The only difference would be is that in this case, the method would be post because I'm actually posting some data. Let me go grab the URL for that, update YouTube statistics. And I'll go ahead and copy this value here. Go back to the Logic app, and I'll paste the value for the URL basically for that update function. And then the biggest difference is that I actually need to pass in the data. So how do you do that? Well, here in the body section or the field, if you click on it, you'll notice that there's this Add Dynamic Content section, which shows you this dialog box. And all I really have to do is I just click this body element here. And what this is actually doing is, as you can see, right here, it has a name of HTTP. This is actually referencing to this particular step in the actual logical app. So as an example, if I was to add another action, let me actually first rename this. So let's say I wanted to do a third HTTP activity. What you'll notice is if I click on this area, on this field now, you'll see that you have HTTP, which is the first one, and then as well as update YouTube stats. And that's how it actually references the different output parameters that are available for these different steps. So this is how you know you can actually consume values that come out from your different connectors and different steps in your Logic app. So let me go ahead and actually delete this, and let's go back here. So basically that's it. I set the method as post, I set the URL, I set the body. If you actually had authentication and authorization that you needed to provide using HTTP headers, you can actually provide those values right here. If you needed to have more advanced options, you can actually go in this, click this advanced properties, and then you can actually specify different parameters for authentication. You can also provide different settings by clicking the settings button here. So whether you have pagination, if you want to use asynchronous pattern, timeout values, and things like that. So in this particular case, I don't actually need any of that, so I'm just going to skip that step for now. So that is basically a very simple version of a Logic app, and it basically allows me to make a API call to my Azure function, which actually makes a API call to a YouTube endpoint. It comes back a response. It then takes that response and we feed it into the next step inside of a Logic app to be able to then pass the values that we received from the prior step and actually pass it to the Azure function, which then in turn stores that inside of our Azure table storage. So let's actually go ahead and save this. And let's take a look at what happens here. So right now, let me actually go back to my Azure app, and I'll show you under the platform features, there's this log streaming. So if I actually open this up, you'll actually notice that I'll be able to actually see the statistics of that particular Azure function being executed. So as you can see, it just got triggered, and we can see that the video and subscriber count information came back, and that somebody actually invoked the YouTube statistics function, and you can see it executes again, and it will continue doing so basically every 10 seconds as we configured it. So if I go ahead and actually refresh my table storage explorer, you can see that the values came through and everything is working as expected. So I'm going to go ahead and actually go back and change the interval here. So let me change that to hours. And I really don't need to update it more often than 8 hours. Even 8 hours is probably a little bit too much, but I'll leave it at that for now. So I'll go ahead and save this Logic app, and that's pretty much it. Now, a couple other things to note. When you're inside of your Logic app, you can also see the actual functions executing here as well. And you can actually click on them and see the additional information for that particular Logic app. And you can also see the output values that so input as well as output actually come through right here. So you could see that the output was this count here, and then the input was the same set of values, and then the output was just a simple 200 with no body content being returned. So that is as simple as that. You can actually resubmit these requests if you wanted to, and you can do a few other things in this Logic app for being able to change access keys, look at some metrics, set up alerts, and things like that. So hopefully this is useful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave your comments in the comment section, and I will talk to you next time.